like the shock has worn off, like the newness of, and that like the rawness of the shock. But there are still days and still moments in my mind where I'm like, there's no way, like there's no way that this is like my reality still. I think the overarching theme is just that like his absence is such a presence in my life, which I know is such a interesting way of wording that. Maybe that, oftentimes we're very aware of what is in our life and like a presence that's actually there. But I think so many of us can empathize with the fact that like, no, it's actually their absence that is a presence. It's that void, right? This is the Life with Grief podcast, the podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails, and so much more. I want you to think of this podcast as a safe space where I'm a friendly face and we're just journeying through this together to figure out how to live life with our grief in tow. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, support, tangible coping tools, inspiration, and some laughs along the way to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. But grieving or not, we're getting into countless topics here on the podcast, from coping with loss to self-development and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in. Hey guys, welcome back to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. And today I just wanted to have a fun, open, vulnerable conversation and just share some thoughts and feelings that I'm having around approaching the 4-year mark without my dad. He died almost 4 years ago on July 13th, 2020. And I did this last year with my mom on her 4-year angel day of sorts. And I love doing episodes like this. I just think it's important to take a moment and just process and comprehend and reflect. And I just wanted to share that with you guys. What I'm feeling and thinking with this day approaching, but also some things I'm reflecting on and things that I have learned. So really anyone here listening can perhaps glean something from this episode and take something away from this conversation that you can maybe apply to your grieving journey or something that just might touch you in a way. And so it's not just me talking about my dad for however long this episode is going to be, although I would certainly love to do that as well. And just to get this out there first, just to share this, my dad's name was Greg Jordan. And I'm feeling a lot of things with this angel day, with this death anniversary looming. It's in just a couple days here from when this episode is getting released. And I think there's a lot of things that I'm thinking that I'll share here in a moment, but I think that the trippiest part for me, especially this year, is that on the 13th, on July 13th, it is my dad's angel day. It's also my father-in-law's birthday, which it always has been, right? It's always going to share that day with the day that my dad died, which is very strange and kind of interesting. I'm very grateful for my father-in-law and we have a great relationship, but it's just so interesting, right? Like I have my actual dad who left the earth on that day, but then like that's the day that my father-in-law was born. It's just kind of an interesting relationship. But what's really special this year is that I now have my daughter and she is actually going to be turning 6 months on July 13th. So I have to say, it's very bittersweet. There's been a lot on my mind, but I will say there's something about her being 6 months on that day and that coming up that is just really special. I'm just very grateful. I'm very grateful for her. And I just want to recognize anybody here who has lost a child or even went through a pregnancy loss or anything like that. Like, please know I'm not tone deaf here. I recognize how very fortunate I am. For me, I just call that out because that's just one of the few silver linings that I can call out on a day like a death anniversary or like an angel day. And, ultimately that is what I'm going to be trying to focus on that day. We're also taking a little family vacation, just a long weekend. And so I'm really going to just try and relax and just have some fun and think of my dad and think of him fondly and not think too much about the circumstances around his death and the day that he died. I think that's one big theme for me in the last several years is, I certainly can't help thinking about that. I can't help thinking about the day that he died or the way in which he died. Like, that is just a part of my story. It's a part of my life. It's one of my life experiences, unfortunately. But I really have taken away, and I'm kind of skipping ahead here a little bit, but I'm allowing my thoughts to flow today. I realized that that's a shift that we can sometimes make on days like this, is we can certainly let those thoughts come in, but also finding beautiful things to focus on and, things that make us happy and just spark a little bit of joy on those days. That's especially important. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's just some initial thoughts, but just to kind of hone in here a little bit on some things that I am feeling and thinking, which I'm sure many, many, many of you here listening can empathize with. First and foremost, definitely, I always do sort of end up reflecting on the day that he died, the morning that he died. He died close to 3:30 in the morning, and I was actually in this very room that I am recording in. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see my background. It's now my office/daughter's nursery. But at the time that I was living here, it was technically my parents' place. Now, since they died, we have taken it over. But this was sort of like the guest room. This was my room of sorts for the time being. And I got the call in this very room that he had died. And I knew he wasn't doing well. For those who don't know, he had prostate cancer. It metastasized. So it was in his lower back and his brain. It had really spread. So the death certainly was not a surprise, but I had visited him in this hospice facility the day before. He was not doing well. So I knew he wouldn't be long for this world, but I really did hope that I would be able to see him again the following day. But frankly, with how he did the last day that I did see him, he was like not conscious. He just lost consciousness very quickly, and I'll just leave it at that. And just the days, leading up to his death. But, when I think about his death or like the day that he died, sure, it's hard to think about. It's graphic. I won't go into too much detail about this. I don't want this to be triggering, but essentially, because he had already died, they had like covered him up with a white, sheet. I went in there, I held his hand, but I like really wanted to see his face. Like, I couldn't imagine seeing his face for the last time. But the difference with my dad, unlike my mom, I saw my mom take her last breath. Like, the death hadn't like set in yet, you know what I mean? Like, I saw that end, whereas my dad, thankfully I was close. Like, the facility he was at was just like 5 minutes away. So I was nearby, and actually so close, thankfully, that like he was still a little bit warm, but I could feel him getting colder. So that was like very unsettling to me. I did take the sheet down to reveal his face, and I don't regret doing that. But if you are listening and you know what it's like to see a loved one, or really anyone who has died, like kind of post-mortem like that, it's very scarring. I'm not gonna belabor that, but I just broke down. I sort of thought I was mentally prepared for that, and I really wasn't, to see him in that way. And I just sat with him, really as long as I wanted to. I mean, they did not rush me out, thankfully, but it was traumatizing, like you would imagine. And I just had those moments with him. And I honestly don't even know how long I was there for. It was a little while for sure. And I left, and I went home. What else are you supposed to do? And I was by myself. I was living by myself at the time. I wasn't dating anybody at the time. I had just gone through a breakup. So, just processing that on my own. And thankfully, I have a lot of East Coast family. They're all on the East Coast of the United States. So, of course, I did not get back to sleep that night, even though it was in the middle of the night. Honestly, I'm kind of like grayed out a lot of this morning, but I think I just laid there and cried and tried to process everything. And eventually, I think maybe an hour later or something, I'm kind of guessing now, but I got out of bed and I informed his siblings. I started calling people, and because that was on me to do. I don't have siblings. I don't have anyone else to do that. So, I had to make a lot of those calls, but I did receive, of course, a lot of support that day, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And, my dad's siblings are all phenomenal, and I have just fantastic, great aunts and uncles and cousins and everyone. So, feel very supported and uplifted in that way. But I've talked about this before a little bit on the podcast as well, but it was so interesting, and perhaps some people here have experienced something like this too. I certainly know other like grief coaches and people that I've talked to have also kind of said this, which is interesting, that especially when someone dies in the middle of the night like that, like sometimes it's actually very calm and very weirdly peaceful and like eerily quiet. Like that's what I remember so vividly about that morning. Going to the facility as I drove over, and of course it's not going to be chaotic like it is in the middle of the day as it is in the middle of the night. So, but just taking note of that was sort of interesting, just environmentally what was going on around me. But also just that morning, I watched the sun come up on my back patio and just, again, just really trying to process and make sense of everything. Cuddling with my dog because she was like all I had left. But it was, processing the fact that my dad had now died, but now both mom and dad were gone. So it was really this wall of grief and shock of, okay, mom is gone, dad is gone, and both are gone. And I've spoken about this before, like grieving each of these things separately, like my mom individually, my dad individually, and then both of them like together, like our little family unit. And that process kind of started too. So I think it was like a little extra overwhelming that day. But really, I just remember feeling extreme isolation and loneliness. And again, this is not even like a knock to my friends or family or anything. Like I was supported, right? But no one can take the place of the person that you've lost and that you love. So like you could be, it's very cliche, but like you could be surrounded by all the love and the support and everything from everyone, and that's beautiful. But it doesn't make up for their absence, right? Their absence is deafening. So I felt that very profoundly and just very directionless, really, because I didn't have either parent now. Like when you experience something traumatic like that, like oftentimes a parent, for most of us, is someone you want to call. It's like one of your go-to people for so many. So just, eventually getting used to that feeling of like, wow, not only can I not go to my dad, I can't go to my mom. I can't go to either one. I am truly, again, for all intents and purposes, like in this alone now. Like I am here by myself, like, whoa. And there is a lot of complexities that come with processing that and trying to process that. And I am still processing that, you guys. Like 4 years later, here I am. So I just really can't believe it's been 4 years. I think that's like probably the most shocking part. I say this with my mom too. It's been 4.5 for her now. It'll be 5 this December. And so it's just a very, like the shock has worn off, like the newness of, and that like the rawness of the shock. But there are still days and still moments in my mind where I'm like, there's no way, like there's no way that this is like my reality still. It just comes with the territory, I think. But, I think the overarching theme is just that like his absence is such a presence in my life, which I know is such a interesting way of wording that. Maybe that, oftentimes we're very aware of what is in our life and like like a presence that's actually there. But I think so many of us can empathize with the fact that like, no, it's actually their absence that is a presence. It's that void, right? So I definitely find myself reflecting on that. And that comes up even outside of his death anniversary. You know, of course, I think about the day that my parents died every once in a while. I can't help that. And nor do I avoid that. I think it's very important to help us process thinking about those things. But this is where we have to be really careful that we do not get stuck there, that we're not wallowing there, that moment or that day or whatever is preventing us from moving forward. And that's really where I come in as a grief coach, and where I've just, as a bereaved person myself, have had to realize like, okay, this was a moment in my life. This is an experience. This is something that for some reason was contracted. I was supposed to go through this in my lifetime, I guess. Not that it like had to happen for a reason, but you know, I am sort of a believer in that we have these soul contracts in a sense, and this was part of mine, I guess. So I don't know. You totally don't have to buy into that. That's just my belief, but it is interesting. I've talked about this before. You know, I likely would never have gotten into grief work. I never would be doing the work or the coaching or whatever it is that I do now if my parents hadn't died. So that's interesting to think about. You know, I don't use that as an excuse. I just, you know, I use my experience and my learnings to just come at grief from a place of service and in a heart-centered way. And, you know, we get to wake up every day and choose how we want these devastating life events to guide us or affect us. And ultimately it is up to us, and we get to choose, which I think is a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful gift. Some other things I'm thinking about are more just specific to him, and I'll kind of just like breeze through these a little bit. But, you know, I love almost having a diary of sorts with this podcast now, and how I'm feeling and things to look back on. And for me, several things that come up. One is our father-daughter trips that we would take and how much those meant to him. And from my experience, I'm totally not saying other dads don't prioritize father-daughter trips. I'm sure they do. In my experience, I had never really witnessed any other father of a lot of my friends or distant friends or whatever, like prioritize that in the way that he did. And I am just so grateful for that. It's something that I really am going to encourage my own husband to do with our daughter, because I think that is just such special bonding time. And the fact that he even wanted to do those things with me and was so adamant about that is amazing. I mean, I recognize how blessed I am. I truly do. We went on some beautiful trips. There's a lot that stick out. We went to Montana and Wyoming and stuff once and explored that. We went to the Southwest a couple times, so like New Mexico, Arizona. My parents and I love the Southwest. And actually, one time we went on a road trip. He, long story short, worked on the East Coast. He had to move back there for a period of time. And so I road tripped down there with him. And I flew back to California, I think, out of New Mexico. And that was just such a beautiful father-daughter bonding thing. And it was a really pivotal time in my life, too. I was actually changing careers and everything. So he was just my go-to person for talking to about things like that and what to do next and just bouncing ideas off of. He was just so fun to do that with. And one of the other big trips that we had gone on was to Ireland, and that was incredible. I mean, we were there, I think, about a week, and he let me plan a lot of it, mostly because he had to work really hard to even pay for it. So he was like, you book the B&Bs, you do everything. Like, these are just the places I want to go, because he and my mom had already been there, partially on their honeymoon, which was adorable. And so, yeah, we just went kind of around the country and visited a place that we believe our family to be from. And it was beautiful. It was so memorable. And we had these beautiful, deep conversations that I'll spare all of you from. I'll keep that between my dad and I. But just about like life and the direction of life and things that I might want to explore, and just like great conversation. He was just an easy guy to talk to and a fun guy to talk to. And I missed that so much, so much. I also miss his sense of humor. He had sort of a drier sense of humor that was just so funny. One of the things that I often reflect on are like movies that we enjoyed together, and one that he absolutely loved, like literally watched a scene from this movie so many times, was Bridesmaids, actually. And if anybody here has seen Bridesmaids, the scene when the main character, Kristen Wiig, is a bit drugged up on the plane and it's just very chaotic and very, very funny. Oh my God, he would just crack up at that scene, and just like so many different scenes in that movie that was just very like, I don't know, just short, dry sense of humor. It's just so funny. He would just crack up. And like, he was one of those guys that when he really laughed, like he really laughed. And it wasn't often that you really got him to that point where he was like dying laughing. And it was almost like his laugh was funnier than whatever had been said or whatever was happening in front of us. So I just remember that, and he just had the best laugh. And his hugs, he just had the best hugs, as so many dads do. It was just a big old bear hug. I literally remember he would hug me so tight sometimes that I would almost like white out because he was just like hugging me so tight. But I remember anytime I would walk into the house, especially when I was older, and if it had been a few days or a week, if I was off at college or something and I hadn't seen him, he's like, hey, hon, hey, Tara. And he'd get up out of the chair and just give me the biggest hug. I miss those hugs very, very much. Hey there, really quick, did you know there are 6 new designs for my Losses Become Gains daily journal? I am seriously so excited to share these with you. I'm calling these new designs my Mediterranean collection because it really speaks to those fun vacation in Europe and Mediterranean vibes, which I personally love. And they're all just so fun, but are also such an impactful part of your daily routine. And the patterns are so awesome. And really, there is something for everyone here. There is a Grecian tile, Seville oranges, Positano stripes. We want to think beachy vibes here. Aperol spritz, ocean waves, and limoncello. As always, you get 3 months of prompts with room for free writing, a section in the beginning to help you tap into who you are and your why, what your goals are, and there are also some clear instructions on how to best utilize this journal. It takes literally 5 minutes a day, and it's really just a simple yet wonderful practice that will truly make a long-lasting impact on your healing and grieving journey. You can find them on Amazon by searching for the Losses Become Gains Daily Journal. Be sure to scroll down to find each pattern, or tap the link in the show notes for more. My daddy was just so intelligent, and he was so well read. He read Shakespeare, he read, and understood it. I mean, like literally, me and Shakespeare were on different wavelengths. I've really tried to get into it. I have such an appreciation for it, but yeah, he just really appreciated good literature. And I think that, and his intelligence, he had like near genius intelligence. He had a very high IQ, which I always was just so proud of and very fascinated by. And so I think that made him, he was a criminal defense attorney. I think just that dichotomy of like him being that through his job, which he loved. He said to me so many times, Tara, I hope you find a career or a job or something that I love as much as I love law, because then you truly will not work a day in your life. Like, I want you to find something like this because, man, it feels good. And truthfully, what I'm doing right here, what I'm doing on this podcast, when I, am coaching, when I'm helping fellow grievers, like, it is so true. When you do find something that you're so passionate about, and when you feel like you're so called to do it, and you're good at it and everything, like, there's no better feeling. And so he just really instilled that in me and inspired me to do that and explore that. And I'm still exploring that, even outside of any grief work that I do, and just to always be curious and always to keep challenging ourselves in that way. But by day he would do that, but he was also a beautiful artist. I've shared some of his art on Instagram before, but he was a beautiful painter. He oil painted, he sketched beautifully. I think he even did some work with like charcoal and things like that. I mean, he was just so talented in so many ways. But again, just that balance of artist but lawyer. I mean, he was just so multifaceted. I think that's just what's so cool about him. Like, he was just so cool. I don't know. He was just a cool guy. And I should also mention, he had me later in life. My parents were 13 years apart. So my dad was 45 actually when they had me. He was just an old soul. Like, he enjoyed things that like not a lot of my friends' parents did. And I don't say that in a bad way. Like, he didn't need a lot. He was not a materialistic guy. Like, we always joked that he could like go out and live in the middle of the woods with like quite literally no electricity and he'd be just fine. Like, he'd figure it out. He really just lived simply and beautifully and was so appreciative of what was in front of him. And like, yeah, electricity and like all of these other things are nice, and it was very much like well, I'll have it if it's there kind of thing. But like, he was never that guy where like, I need, I want. And as I've gotten older, I've really tried to instill that in myself, and hopefully will instill that in my daughter, that like, it's very easy to get caught up in a lot of material things, and we're constantly on social media and thinking that we need things or want things or, need the shiny new object, whatever it is. And like, my dad taught me that like, you just don't. Like, it's okay to just be grateful for what you do have. And I'm talking more material things here, but not to just always want the next big, pretty, beautiful thing. You know what I mean? So just a really important life lesson that I learned from him, and I learned it earlier on and I was aware of it before, but unfortunately now that he died and now that I've really had time to reflect on this, I've realized it now more than ever. Just a few last things. I just miss some of the things that he cooked. He was known for his meatloaf, breakfast. Man, he did breakfast so good. He was a big breakfast guy. Pancakes. He did eggs and bacon and stuff really well. And he didn't necessarily do that every morning, but he's just a big breakfast guy. And even if we would go out to breakfast, just like father-daughter breakfast, like we would both get Denny's Grand Slams. This is so 90s. This is back when we lived on the East Coast. But anytime that we would maybe go on a trip or we would do something, we would either get like a McDonald's breakfast or a Denny's Grand Slam, which is hilarious given the fact that I was like just this little girl eating this Grand Slam breakfast thing, which was massive and way too big for me. It was just so funny, but just these beautiful memories, Stuffing at Thanksgiving, that was really our thing. We both loved stuffing and just Thanksgiving overall. Drinking a Guinness with him when I was older, and just like getting in touch with our Irish roots. Like I said, went on a big trip to Ireland, so that was a really cool thing. And just to be able to, just share a drink with him and kind of bond in that way. As I mentioned, we lived on the East Coast. I grew up on the East Coast until I was about 10 or 11 years old. So that's where all his family is, as I mentioned. So we just have a big connection there. So whenever I think about the East Coast, I really I think about my dad, and I just feel very connected to him in that way. Anytime I go back there, I feel connected to my mom there too, for sure. But it was really my mom's idea to move out to California. So I think he probably would have stayed on the East Coast if he could have. And he continued working kind of bi-coastal even after we moved. So there was a big piece of him that was always there. And I will actually share that as the cancer like moved into his brain and he just started losing some of his capacities as far as like forming sentences that made a lot of sense. He was talking about the East Coast a lot, and frankly, not a lot of it would make sense, some of the things he was saying, but we could tell like like his mind was almost like in Boston. He also loved Boston, like a lot of just that, Northeast vibes and there. So it's just so interesting. And I've heard of this happening with people who have, again, lost some of these capacities or were affected by some illness or disease of the brain or something that affected the brain in that way. And they, can revert back to like languages that they maybe spoke as a child, but maybe didn't as an adult or something. And just kind of like, I don't even know how to say this, but like revert back to like their roots, their happy place where they're comfortable. And I just thought that was so beautiful. I was like, oh my God, Dad, I hope you feel that you're there. I almost hope you're not aware of this reality of you in this hospital bed and whatever. Like, this sounds so weird to say. I've never said this out loud actually, but I hope that that's where his mind was. I don't know. I just wanted him to be happy in those days. So for me, if that's where his mind was and it was the East Coast and places that he loved and were comfortable for him, like, that's all I wanted. And now that he's gone, I'm hoping he's out there visiting and, whenever he's not visiting me. So I think too, some of the last things I'll just mention is, just my dad had a really great listening ear. Like his guidance was just so good, but he was very strategic with it. Like he didn't just give advice for the sake of giving advice and hearing his own voice. He was very thoughtful with how he listened and was very intentional with what he said, and almost to a point sometimes where I'm just like, can you give me a little more? Like you can talk a little bit more actually. You don't have to like listen so much. I was very much a product of both of my parents. My mom was faster paced. She was a talker. She doled out advice like it was her day job. And my dad was kind of on the other end of the spectrum. So it's very funny being their daughter. I fall somewhere in the middle, I would say. But that is something that my dad really taught me, was like, have a good listening ear and be thoughtful with guidance or advice if people are even asking for it, and just, having awareness around that. He did that so well without even trying to. And something else that occurred to me too, and I think this is where, these next few things I'm going to mention are more overarching. It's not so specific to my dad. It's just like, for me, I'm 33 right now, and there's definitely moments where I'm like, I am not old enough to have a dad that's dead. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just not. Like, I anticipated having him for so much longer, as so many of us do. Like, even if our parents do die on the later side, like it's never not terribly shocking, right? Like death is shocking no matter what, even if we kind of see it coming. So I don't know, that thought has crossed my mind lately. So I just wanted to share that in case anybody can empathize with that. Just that feeling of like, oh my God, I'm not old enough for this. Like, I still need my parents. Like, you always need your parents, in my opinion. That's how it feels for me, at least. Never too young or too old to need your mom and dad. And I think I've also discovered definitely some new phases and some new stages of my grief with him. But I would say most notably what comes up for me is not seeing him as a grandfather to my daughter, to my baby girl. I always had hoped, and I thought many years ago, especially when I was younger, like again, before they got sick or anything, that both of my parents would be here to be grandparents, to know at least one child, if not more, if we have any. And so that's very difficult, and just trying to wrap my head around that. And again, that advice, being able to call, text, have them babysit, for crying out loud. I mean, just all of these things, and them just being here in my life and in her life. That's excruciating. And I would love to think that maybe they held her and they helped guide her to us, to choose us as her parents. But that's a beautiful thought, and I love thinking about that. And I choose to believe that happened. But, it doesn't take up for the fact that they're not here in physical form. So I just want to validate that for anybody feeling this way as well, or if something like that has crossed your mind. And also, being at the 4-year mark, I worry about memories being altered or fading. Like, I almost wonder, now, like with time, the older I get, are things getting kind of like mixed up in my mind? Or am I really imagining that? Or did I see that on a family video? And that's my memory, because I do go back and watch family videos to kind of keep them alive and just keep that going. Make them feel like they're still here, and just hear their voice and the things they would say, and just reminding myself of those things. But I also have to remember that I am definitely of the belief that, my parents do have, and your loved ones too, have ways of guiding us and making themselves known and making their thoughts and feelings and guidance and things known from wherever you choose to believe that they are. And if we get like an intuitive hit on something, or we remember something specific, that might not be for no reason, and that there could really be something to that. And so I try and just release that pressure or that fear, like, oh my gosh, am I going to forget things, or are things fading? Like, inevitably with time, yes, things do fade. Things might get altered a little bit. So I think that's really where we have this amazing opportunity to tap more into our intuition and just really trust ourselves and trust that we know and that we knew our loved ones better than anyone, or certainly we knew them and their relationship with us, and that's a very sacred thing, and that we're not going to forget as much as we maybe fear that we will. And yes, it is inevitable. Things might get a little fuzzy, they might get a little altered, they might fade a little, but the core of them, the essence with them, is still with us. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier. I've definitely noticed that, my dad's death itself, it doesn't sting as much as it used to, but as I mentioned earlier, there is still a level of shock. There is still that feeling of like, you should be here. And I don't ever foresee that going away, honestly. And I mentioned this in a somewhat recent podcast episode, but and also just on Instagram, I've talked about this, that there is a part of me that is experiencing a level of frustration that I haven't had in my grief, or not like this prominent of frustration of not being able to communicate with them. I find myself very frustrated by that. Like, I'm sad over it, but it's more like, I think especially this has come out now that I've had my daughter, like, I like I said earlier, I want to be able to call them. I want to be able to text them to come over to their house. They could come over to mine and just share in all of this, just share in life. And that is just not my reality. And so there is a lot of frustration that can come with that. And I wouldn't say it's anger, but it's just that, like, damn, like what I wouldn't give. Like, you should be here. And we unfortunately are sometimes just resigned to the fact that, like, that is not our reality. And I hate to say that we have to find some acceptance with that. That's why I say we sort of have to just be resigned to it a little bit. And I hate just saying that and feeling like we have to leave it right there. But ultimately, if that is our circumstances, that is our circumstances. But I am also of the belief that we do have this incredible power to keep that connection with our loved ones going long after they die. So just to shift into some things that I'm more specifically reflecting on, some things I've learned, because I think this is a good segue into that part of this conversation, is, well, many things. I think one thing that I've certainly reflected on and learned is just, they just don't make them like my dad anymore. I alluded to this earlier, but he was just such an old soul. Like, I genuinely believed he had lived some lives here, his soul, before coming here. And I truly feel that this is like what made him him. It's the core of what makes him so special to me, and what was so unique about him as my dad. And he was such an interesting balance between my mom's personality, and then he was just his whole personality himself. And anyway, it just makes me appreciate him I appreciated him before, but it has just made me appreciate him more and more since he's been gone. And I'm very proud of the fact that I can say, like, they truly don't make him like my dad. And of course, everyone can say that and might feel that way about their parent. That's fine. We're all entitled to that. I think we're all a little biased. But there were just certain aspects of my dad where, you know, there are, I guess I could say, like, there's some more mainstream parents, right? And like my dad was just not mainstream. Like, he really appreciated quality in life over like quantity. You know what I mean? So anyway, it's just a special thing about him. And I will also share, you know, I've been doing a couple more episodes on this recently with regards to my experiences with mediums and going to a medium and connecting with my parents after they have died. And it is very interesting. And by the way, I am not here to convince anyone that you need to go see a medium or that you need to believe in them or anything like that. I'm purely sharing some thoughts here. But even his personality comes through that. And that also, by the way, is I think how you know you have like a very legitimate medium that you're working with. They're not going to say very generic things. Yes, there are going to be messages of support, but if you are working with a really good medium, they will bring those specifics. They will bring that evidence. In fact, there's going to be an episode coming very soon with an evidential medium, which I'm so excited for you guys to listen to. And she goes more into depth about this. So I will kind of just leave this here. But one of the things that I mentioned in that episode coming out soon is that the way that like my mom communicates and the way that like her personality comes through as I'm speaking with this medium is very different than my dad, as it should be, because it should reflect their personalities as they were here, because, you know, their soul is still the essence of them. It's still the same. So my dad was a little more soft-spoken here. I wouldn't call him shy, but he was just like, you know, my mom's much more of like Taurus energy, firecracker. Like, I'm going to make it very clear. I'm going to make it very known what I am kind of thinking and feeling and whatever. Whereas like my dad communicates, he's gotten like better with it with time, but like almost more in like metaphors or like more like symbolism, if you will. Like, it's a little harder to decipher what he's trying to like say, but he'll show, it feels like he just shows a lot of symbols and things that remind me of him. So like cigars, he loved cigars. So like cigars will come up, like him in his old study and like leather and like this mahogany and this wood and stuff, like this old office that we had in an old house of ours. Just very specific things that are very him. And it's just really cool. It's just a really cool thing to experience. So again, more to come with mediumship on this podcast. I have had an episode, I will link it here in the show notes, speaking with Elise Dussault, who also began her mediumship journey once she lost her fiance in a very, very tragic accident. So definitely go check out that episode if you're a little bit more curious about this or just how this could work or just hearing some more experiences around it. And again, just stay tuned for more on this podcast because I'm digging into that realm a little bit more. And I just find it very, very interesting as far as a way to connect with our loved ones. Hey, my friend, are you needing some relief from your grief? If so, I have an exciting new offering that will help you get exactly that. My 14-day Relief in Your Grief challenge brings you powerful, impactful, bite-sized daily content alongside the perfect meditation. One of the biggest struggles I hear from my members, clients, and people on social media is that they just need some relief from the stress, sadness, and pain that grief and loss can cause. But here's the thing. So many people are lost and unsure about where to start. This can feel like a huge thing to tackle, so we are doing it together, and we're starting with just 14 days. Give me 2 weeks and I will help you begin to take that anxiety, heartache, and anguish and turn it into peace, clarity, and hope as you move forward with your grief. Seriously, what do you have to lose by joining? Challenge your grief and give yourself some relief, my friend. I have no doubt this 14 days will be an inspiring, uplifting, perspective-changing experience for you. Join now through the link in the show description. Last few things here that I'm just, again, sort of reflecting on, things I've learned. I'm in a very interesting phase of life where I've had this very full circle moment. Seeing my husband as a girl dad now, it's almost like, it's so strange, you guys. It's like I'm in my mom's position. I'm now the one with the daughter, which was like my mom having me. And then it's like my husband is now the girl dad and my dad was a girl dad, if that makes sense. So there's just, this little family of three with the mom and the dad and the daughter. And I just feel it's so trippy now being in that position. And I'm just like, wow, like life really does work in very interesting ways. And it's just given me a different perspective on like my little family unit and things that my dad might have been thinking early in parenthood and things my mom might have been thinking and feeling in early parenthood. And so I've just, learned a lot through that. I continue learning a lot through that. I have no doubt that that's going to be happening for years. And, more will come to the surface with all of that. And it's just a really interesting new version of myself. And this happened even before I became a parent. I'm still a girl who needs her dad, but there is a part of me that is I know is very resilient and I know is very strong. And if I've learned anything, it's that I need to give myself more credit for that. And I need to acknowledge that more. And for me, it's never been about being strong or being resilient to where like I can't show my emotion or that I have to like keep things down. Literally not at all. I've been very blessed in that I've had people mention like, you are being very strong, you're being very resilient right now. And I'm like, great, thank you. It's because I have to be. I didn't really have a choice. But I do realize, and I think especially in my work with people as a grief coach, that is hard. So if you have tapped into a level of inner strength and resilience that you perhaps not had before, please congratulate yourself. Please pat yourself on the back and give yourself some overdue credit because, my God, you guys, that is hard. You don't even realize you are tapping into that strength and those like resilience reserves that we all have until you go through a really devastating loss like this. So I think that's just a really, really important thing to call out. I don't feel that is like a cocky thing to call out. I don't feel that I think it's just something that we can and should humbly say to ourselves, like, I'm very proud of myself for keeping things going, for moving forward with my grief with me, for acknowledging it, for giving it the time that it needs, but also having my weak moments, because that's ultimately what creates that strength and resilience too. And that is so freaking cool. That is something to celebrate. And I think also just, with my dad, it's just, he was a very patient, very, very patient, very painfully patient man. He was very thoughtful and he was very, very compassionate. And so for me, I think it's just really keeping that patience and that thoughtfulness and that compassion alive, and just reminding myself to hold that for others, to give that gift to others, because we need more patient and thoughtful and compassionate people in this world. Like, we really do. And grief can teach us nothing, if not all three of those things. So my grief taught me that, but really my dad and my mom taught me those things too. And also to just be resourceful, to be wise, to be street smart, to be book smart, and to be truthful. And there was a lot of things I just threw out there, but just all of those qualities, all of these amazing qualities that my dad had that, I think some of it is like just inherently within me. I do consider myself a resourceful person. I feel like I'm fairly wise most of the time. Not even with what I just do here. I just mean in life in general. And, again, just like I said, being truthful, being honest, being real, being raw, being vulnerable, and just opening your heart and your mind and sharing that with others too, and creating a warm, safe space for people to feel that they can be that way with you too. My dad did that really, really beautifully. And so I'm very fortunate in that I had a really wonderful example of that. And that's something that I continue to carry with me. And I'm really reflecting on, on this particular phase in my life and this particular week, especially as I'm thinking about him a little more than usual. Not that I'm always not thinking about him, but also just speaking kindly to people, speaking kindly about people. It's very easy to get caught up in gossip. I am so guilty of it. I mean, and also just like, even with like reality TV and trash TV and social media, it's like all of these things can sometimes really bring out the worst in us. It can bring us to a very negative place. There's not, I see it all the time. There's really not a lot of kindness out there. It's actually very scary what some people will say online, or the conclusions that they jump to, or the judgments they make on people that have nothing to do with them and are not even remotely part of their life or have no impact on their life. It's like really crazy. So sort of that idea, like if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. My dad was very discerning with that. Like, you seriously did not hear him speak. I'm not exaggerating. Like, he did not speak poorly about people. Like, sure, he might express some frustration over something or someone if they were being, unkind or just out of line or something like that. But like, just coming from a place of kindness and speaking more kindly, thinking more kindly, listening more carefully. Also, listening more than you talk sometimes. I am so guilty. This has been a long time thing that I've been working on myself. I have a tendency of doing this. I will say, as a coach, as someone who has now gotten trained in grief coaching and transformational life coaching, this is a skill that truly, like, some of us have and some of us do not, or some of us have to work a little bit harder on it. So my dad, he just inherently had this really wonderful skill about just being a very, very good listener, and he listened very carefully and was very intentional with his reflections. And that is a great skill to have, whether or not you're a coach. So that is a personal goal of mine. And so I just throw this out there to you as well. This is all just things to reflect on for ourselves, and just little ways that we might be able to improve, right? I say this both as a coach and someone who quite literally does work in this grief and loss space, but also just as someone who has grieved and someone who is grieving and understands bereavement. Some people don't want advice or guidance or to have a solution. Sometimes they just want you to be there for them. Personally, I am like an action-oriented person. I want to help people feel better. I want to, I think that's why platitudes and grief and all of these things, people don't want people to be uncomfortable, or they don't want them to like be sad, right? I do this to my husband all the time. If he's having a rough day, I'm very much like, okay, how can I help get you out of this? And sometimes we need to just take a step back and realize, like, it's not even necessarily about making them feel better in that moment. Sometimes they just need to feel their feels. We just need to be a presence for them. We just need to be, like I said earlier, that safe space. We just need to hold that space for people. And so that's, I think, a really important thing. I think a lot of us who are grieving, who have grieved very intensely, can attest to sometimes we do need to be made to feel better, but sometimes it really is more just about like being felt and seen and heard, and not just having things barked at us. You know what I mean? So last, very final thoughts here before I wrap up this episode. I think a big overarching takeaway lesson that has really come up for me recently is that our grief continues, but so do we. Our grief can keep us stuck. It can feel like it's not helping us move forward, but we do move forward, and we do have to find ways to move forward, unfortunately, because sometimes we want to feel like we're moving forward, because then we feel like we're moving further away from them. I expressed that when I did this episode about reflecting on my mom's death, where I feel very scared sometimes and very uncomfortable with the idea of like, oh my gosh, now it's like almost 5 years, and like, oh, I feel like I'm moving further away from them, and like they're becoming this more and more distant memory. That's terrifying. And like, again, being the age that I'm at, when I think about, God willing, I have decades more of life, I'm like, that's a long time to not have them around. But I know my dad would want me to move forward. I know he would be very proud of the way that I am trying my hardest to keep their memory alive and keep talking about them and keep them with me, but also live my life and live it really joyfully and with a lot of intention, like we've talked about today. If I ever mention the word, living intentionally and living with meaning and living with purpose, these things I've talked about today are exactly what I mean by that. It's not doing these things in lieu of our person, or it's like that we have to like tamper down how we feel about them or how much we miss them. Not at all. It's doing that. It's remembering, it's talking about them, it's keeping them and their memory and their spirit alive, but it's also keeping ourselves alive and feeling happiness and joy and brightness and all of these wonderful, beautiful things. And that's going to ebb and flow. That is the nature of this very griefy beast that so many of us are dealing with, and you are probably dealing with here if you have stumbled on this podcast. So I just want to put that out there. It's all about balance. It's always been about balance. Okay. So, closing thought, it's just the death of both of my parents. This isn't even necessarily just with my dad, but I certainly think about this with him. It's really shown me what I'm made of. It has, shown me how I have and that I can pick myself up from whatever happens in my life. If I ever lose a job or if whatever might happen in my life again, it's how you pick yourself up. It's how you move forward moment by moment on a day-to-day basis. And for me, it was very much doing this on my own and learning painfully along the way. But that has served me well. And it's been a difficult road. It's been life lessons I was not really ready for, or I didn't think I was ready for, but it's all with these qualities and all with these wonderful things that my parents have instilled in me and things that were inherently with me. And I think they would be proud of that. I know they would be proud of that. And, that they did a good job, because they did. And I had wonderful, wonderful parents. And, I'm not without fault. I am certainly not perfect, but all I can do, and all I would empower you to do is take the best qualities of your loved ones, of all of them, and be unapologetically you, but also like reflect on those things and think about like the positive things that they brought into your life and the value that they added into your life. And all of these wonderful qualities, like I was saying earlier, my dad's patience, his resilience, his intellect, and all of these wonderful things. And I think about this with my mom too. And I'm like, how can I bring in these wonderful qualities that they had to improve myself a little bit while maintaining my authenticity and staying true to who I am at my core, because I am my own soul here, just as you are yours. So, at the end of the day, just to finish this reflection, I miss my dad more than I can put into words, really, more than I can put into roughly an hour episode. And this is actually longer than I anticipated. So I apologize if you've made it with me this far. Thank you. I hope you are taking something away from this episode today. But, I am comforted by the fact that he is with my mom. It's despite having neither of them now, which is still like incomprehensible to me, there is a little bit of comfort with that. And I know They will be waiting for me with open arms whenever it is my time to transition. Hopefully not anytime soon. I am knocking on wood. And in the meantime, I carry them with me. I share them in episodes like this. I talk about them with family and friends, and I talk to them out loud by myself, and I talk about them to my daughter. And there's so many ways that we can continue to keep our loved ones alive and well with us. And so I hope you've taken away something from this episode today, something that perhaps inspired you or just helped you feel validated in your grieving journey. That is certainly why I'm here. If there is something that you want to share about your dad, please feel free to DM me, send me an email, hello@lossesbecomegains.com. I love hearing from you guys. If you enjoyed this episode, I would truly appreciate a comment, a rating, a review, whatever platform you're listening on. It just helps me get this podcast out there so more fellow grievers can hear it and feel seen and heard in their journey as well. And with that all being said, as always, I'm sending you guys the biggest hug and so much love, especially to those who have lost a doubt out there. I dedicate this episode to you and to my dad, Greg. It's so hard, you guys, I know, but our dads are with us, and I'm with you too. I'm always here to support you. So I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you in the next episode. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you are taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, ways to work with me, to shop my daily journal, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you haven't left a rating or review, please do so. I would so appreciate it. Or if you feel so inclined, to share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. I'll catch you in the next episode.